Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'd like to talk about a very interesting asymmetry between good and evil. But before I get to that, I'd like to say who I'm going to be talking to, because this is building on a number of things. This is not, I think, generally accessible. And so, certainly this is not something that I think most atheists will appreciate, especially lack of belief atheists, for the simple reason that if you don't have anything, it can't really give you anything, in the sense of you can't build where there's no ground. You can't build in a void. And yes, of course, lack of belief atheists believe in matter and so on, but, I'm talking about good and evil. I'm not talking about, electrons and protons. And so since they, utterly lack a belief about all the, metaphysical things, at least according to them, there's really nothing to say about that. So I'm going to be using essentially a Thomistic description of evil as the privation of form. Although it actually also works as as the absence of good, which is a form you also find that in other things far beyond Thomistic philosophy and certainly predating it. So I'd say most Christians, Christians who don't believe in free will, whatever, I don't really care about them anyway. I wish them well and stuff. It's just they have nothing valuable to say about anything. Let me see. So there's the Christians. I'd say most Jews would fall into this, especially, any Jew can respect Platonic, Aristotelian thought. Anything like, I think they would work for them. Many Muslims, I think, it varies because you can find some strains of philosophy within Islam which don't really hold there to be evil in the world. Everything's according to God's plan. We just don't understand any of it. So what we call evil is just our misunderstanding of good is, I believe, a strain of philosophy you find in Islam. But I don't know how widespread it is. Islamic philosophy is not, theology philosophy. It is by no means my strong point. So I think there are Muslims who don't fall into that camp, who do actually recognize a real distinction between good and evil. And certainly historically there would have been, prior to, Avicenna, I think? I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Anyway, there was somebody, I think it was Avicenna, who wrote... No, Avicenna was the one against whom was written the... I'm talking about the Incoherence of the Philosophers. What was the... and I don't think that was written by Avicenna. I apologize. I'll look this up. Anyway, the Incoherence of the Philosophers was the great destruction of the influence of Aristotelian thought within the Muslim world at the time, in about the first millennia, the end of the first millennia, roughly. So, prior to that, you'd find it, and the Islamic world is a pretty big place. So presumably there are people who would find it there. Also, pagans who respect anything like Aristotelian thought or Platonic thought, such pagans I think would also find this very intelligible. As I said, atheists not nearly so much. Buddhists and so on, again, probably not. Okay, so having gotten that disclaimer out of the way, because I can see lots of comments that won't help anybody. So getting out of the way who it is I'm actually talking to. To describe evil as the privation of form, that's more technical language. You'd have to know what form means in Aristotelian sense. But so instead to use the absence of good, but specifically the absence of good where there is supposed to be good. As I said, or no, did I say it? Well, anyway, just to give the example, and I apologize if I did say it, we're supposed to have two arms. So to be missing an arm is a natural evil. This is distinct from moral evil. It's not it's fault, but is a natural evil in the sense of there is a good that you're supposed to have that you don't. To be missing two extra arms is not a natural evil because you're not supposed to have them. So evil is then, the absence of good, but good that is supposed to be there. Now, as I said, you can distinguish between natural evil and moral evil. Moral evil are moral evils are actions, things like lying and murdering and so on. That in murder there is a lack of keeping somebody alive. In that gets complicated. I'll actually address that in a little bit. And in lying there is an absence of truth, and so those are. But there's an absence of communicating truth there. So moral evils are in actions, whereas natural evils, by and large, tend to be exist within a moment, such as not having an arm is a natural evil, or your muscles having become very weak from atrophy is a natural evil, or if you suffer brain damage and now can't do arithmetic, that is a natural evil. It's not your fault. There's nothing. You're not morally culpable in any sense for what you can't do, but you are lacking an ability that you're supposed to have. So that's the distinction between natural versus moral evil. And this is, introducing terms that I will be using. I'm not saying that everybody who has ever used the term evil or good has used them in this sense. I'm introducing this language. This is a way of thinking of it that clarifies a great deal and makes the world make a lot more sense. Okay, so having established those terms, and evil being a lack of good, the most common metaphor, metaphor, is that of a shadow. So if you take a powerful flashlight and cast a light on something, you will see you'll get a shadow against it, and then you have a surface behind it, you'll get a shadow. Now, that shadow, well, it looks like it has a shape, it looks like something, you move, you can do the whole wolf, I'm not good at it, but the whole wolf puppet thing, you can do finger puppets and so on. It looks like there are things there, but in fact there aren't. Around them there is light. In the shadow of the thing that's casting the shadow, there simply isn't light. And so that's the distinction. The shadow, it looks, because the way we, our minds process things, the way our brains process things, in particular, a shadow looks like it's got a shape. It looks like it has, like it really is a thing, but in fact it isn't. And one of the clearest ways you can see how it isn't is that there's an interesting thought experiment where you take a super powerful light and you shine it against a movie screen that is 10 light years across. And you're many, you're 100 light years away from it, something like that. And then right in front of the light source, it gets a little complicated if you actually know about intensities and energy and so on. But, let's assuming the appropriate sorts of intensities and heat-resistant fingers and so on. If you just pass your finger across it, the shadow of your finger will go across, so in 1 second, you interrupt the beam right next to the super powerful flashlight and go across. On this 10 light year long movie screen, the shadow of your finger will pass across in 1 second. So it will have done 10 light years the shadow will have moved 10 light years in 1 second. How can it go so much faster than the speed of light? Well, it can't. It can't because it's not, well, in one sense, it depends on how you want to talk about it. It can't because it isn't a thing. There's no thing moving across. Nothing is actually going at that speed. There is simply light and then an absence of light and then light again, at any given place on the screen. And that can happen because, well, there's no thing that is moving. There's simply at any given place light, then there isn't light, then there is light. And it's just when you're looking from a distance, you see it and you can interpret this, this pattern of where there is light and where there isn't light as a shape. But in fact, the only thing that actually moved was that finger, which moved much, much, much slower than the speed of light. So that is to say, the shadow is capable of going much faster than the speed of light because the shadow doesn't exist. Now, of course, it sounds a little silly to say the shadow doesn't exist, because of course you can point to one. You can see it. Look, there's the shadow on the wall. Well, yeah, in one sense, but in a proper sense, it doesn't exist because it can do things that things which exist can't. So evil is like that. It has sort of an outline. You can see it. It can look like something positive, but in fact it's not. Now, as I said, something like murder, it looks so much like murder actually is a positive action, like it's got a shape, because you'd have gone on living if you didn't go and stab him with your shiv. And the key to understanding this, it's actually a very hard problem. which doesn't mean that it's wrong. It simply means that you have to actually think about it for a while to understand it. Imagine that the secrets of the universe can't be comprehended in 3 seconds. Anyway, the relevant thing basically is what actually Brian Niemeyer called secondary cause. When I was speaking with him, called secondary causation. That everything in this world is, or much of the things in this world, not everything I should say, is not directly from God, but rather indirectly from God. All things have their existence through God. God being, as St. Thomas put it, the subsistent act of to be. God is existence itself, utterly unlike us. And so it is, in God we live and breathe and have our being, as the prayer goes. So, all things draw their being from God, but to a great degree we do it indirectly, because one of the great themes of creation is delegation. If you look at everything, we are given it to be goodness to each other. So, a very, very clear example is that God could make all people completely independently of each other, such that there's no such thing as parent and child. But instead, it is given to us to be parent and child, such that it is given to people to actually make other people, such that, we all of us owe our existence to other human beings in addition to God. And as such, our parents are incorporated into God's act of creating us. And so this is a tremendous gift to creation. In fact, in all beauty is a participation in God's goodness. The fact that we can interact with each other is this sort of subsidiary gift of being incorporated into God's goodness. We don't merely appreciate God, but we actually reflect God's goodness to each other, such that we can appreciate God's goodness through each other. So it is a tremendous gift. And in fact, even more complicated is that we tend to, especially modern Americans, I think, modern people in general, and everything I've read through literature suggests pretty much everyone at all times, we tend to like to think in summary. We tend to like to think in like how, in the modern era we have fiction, so we can write down this way, like we think of things in terms of how would I have written this down in a plot synopsis? Or, at most, how would I have written this down in something like a novel with, a bit more detail and a plot synopsis? But, and here's the thing, that's not an accurate way of looking at the world. The world is full of all sorts of things we would never ever write about. Dust and what goes into the sewer after we're done using the bathroom. And those things continue to exist. They keep going. They're there even when we're not looking at them. We never write them down in a plot summary, so we kind of ignore them, but they're obviously important because they're actually there. And so it is with all of the ways in which we affect each other that we just take for granted because we all do it all the time. But we are all constantly arranging the world in such a way that, the rest of the people in it stay alive. We take this so incredibly for granted because it's so incredibly normal to us. This is just the normal way of going about things, that arranging things so that others don't, die. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, we're really used to it. We take it for granted. That doesn't mean it's not real. That doesn't mean it's not important. And it doesn't mean that if we cease to do this, that we have, that we're still doing what we're supposed to do. So that when we cease to do that, when we cease to arrange the world for the benefit of all of our fellow creatures in it, when we in fact arrange the world such that one of them dies, we have ceased to arrange the world in the way we are supposed to. We are, in that sense, we're not. I'm trying to think of how to put this quick, not so repetitively, and I apologize for that. But essentially, what we are leaving off is figuring out how to make the world work with people in it. So if you really, take murder, if you really get into it, whenever a person is murdering another, they are trying to achieve some good that they see, and they're not taking the trouble of figuring out how to achieve this good with a person still in the world. And so, the very positive act itself, the act of, thrusting a knife forward or so on, is very complicated because all all physical acts are positive acts, but all physical acts don't mean anything in themselves. They only mean things in much larger contexts. But moreover, all physical acts only mean things in relation to all other matter. Again, we like to think in summary, like you pay attention only to the knife as if the air ceases to exist and all the other things cease to exist. And I totally get that is incredibly natural. Like, oh, come on, you could just see the knife. That's the important thing. Everyone knows that's the important thing. Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that everybody is right, because we're in the habit of not thinking about things fully. I mean, everyone will admit we leave off thinking about most things. You do any act, and I take my keys and I drop them. What does that do? Well, it made a sound. It made a motion. It got recorded in a video. People saw it, but what does it do past that? I don't even know who's going to watch this video. I don't know who, if anyone, might 10 years from now recall some moment wherein this actually triggers a memory and tells somebody about something. I've got zero way about knowing about any of these things. Advance 10,000 years to people I've got no concept who will exist should the world still be around then. What are the effects on all those people I can't even imagine now? Who knows? Somebody might, because of something trivial that they saw, had do one thing and not another, that, like the proverbial butterfly means that they go to someplace and not another, so they meet somebody or don't, and so on. And these things can have amazing rippling effects, none of which we ever think about, because we can't think about them. There's no practical way to think about them. But the mere fact that we cannot practically think about these things does not mean they don't exist or that they are not important. It's quite possible that, should people come to be born, or should people not be born, whatever, because of that trivial act that I did that happens to remind somebody to say one thing that makes a person, in the conversation a year from now, it makes a person remember something, and so they, go back and get something they lost, etc., all down that chain that I can't possibly imagine. It's still quite important because of what it did, I just can't think about it. That doesn't mean that my thinking about the things I can think about is therefore correct. It just means that I am very, very limited. We are all exceedingly finite beings. And so, when it comes to something that's like a positive action, how is this, in fact, how is this positive action part of a privation? It's part of an incredibly complex system. So you can see where the privation is, in the sense of where a person, in going about trying to achieve good, has left off the work of trying to achieve that good with all the people in it who are supposed to be alive being alive. So you can see the privation there. That, I think, is relatively clear. How that cascades into eventually the physical act of murder is incredibly complicated, and so much so, I think, that it is outside the realm of possible to explain how that very immediate act is in fact part of a privation of good in detail. But on the other hand, the very act of thrusting a knife forward is not in itself evil. It only becomes evil when that enters a person in such a way that it is killing them rather than helping them. Because, of course, a surgeon thrusts a piece of metal forward into a person to cut them open in order to cut a tumor out, in order to then sew them together, and so on. So, on the one hand, yes, the stabbing of the shiv forward is, evil. But in a really technical sense, it isn't. It's only in the larger context of what it is doing that it becomes evil, and only in the larger context can it be understood, therefore, as the privation of something in that larger context. So, yes, this is not, a thorough explanation in the sense of explaining how, say, a steam engine works, where the heat goes in here and pushes and so on, etc. Like, yeah, you can explain how a steam engine works to the point where everyone can, or most people not suffering from various natural evils related to cognition, can understand how the steam engine works and come away saying, yep, I know how a steam engine works, very clear, could build one myself. Probably actually couldn't in practice. One mistake a lot of us make is thinking that we understand things when we don't. There's a lot, and this is about anything, like, watch somebody do something once, then try to do it yourself. And you think like, oh, yep, I understand that completely. And then the first time you try to do it, no, you don't. You don't understand that completely at all. Now, my explanation of how is all evil in absence of good doesn't even have the sort of satisfying thing of saying, yep, totally understand it now. obviously we don't. But at the same time, we are finite creatures, and, to what degree can we understand, the totality of what we're involved in? So it kind of fits. It's a cop-out, in a sense, I know. On the other hand, anybody who tried to explain evil to you, making it completely comprehensible, so you went, oh, yep, completely understand everything having to do with it, is probably selling you something, because there's absolutely no reason to believe we're even capable of that. So, I totally get it's really easy to wave your hands and say, like, well, we can't really understand. On the flip side, since we can't really understand understand the sense of, like, know all of the details and how they all interrelate to each other. That's as good as it can get, unfortunately. It'd be nice if it could get better, but, we are what we are. We're as limited as we are, and have to do the best we can within that. So hopefully that helps you. I'm actually going to do a video about the nature of proof. People misunderstand proof as being like something that, like, twists your arm and forces you to say QED, as if it was like you had literally no ability to deny something, rather than what proof really is, which is a way by which you can know something. So, in any event, what I'm giving you is the directions for how to figure something out, not a complete explanation. I'm not sure a complete explanation is within, it can actually exist within a human mind. For those in the Abrahamic tradition, this is kind of one of the points of the Book of Job, that we don't understand the entire system into which suffering fits. And so it makes sense that we don't understand suffering, because we don't understand the system it's a part of. Sort of a Chestertonian interpretation of that, I suppose. Though by no means I believe unique to Chesterton. Okay. So, having established all this about what the nature of evil is, and how evil does not have a positive existence, but rather a negative sort of non-existence, we infer it looks like it has a shape only because we can make out all the things around it that actually exist. So, here's the curious thing, because you'll occasionally hear this idea that that you need evil to exist in order to be able to appreciate good. Now, you don't. I suspect most people know that you don't. Pretty obviously you don't. With an asterisk, you need the possibility of evil in order for there to be good. Because the possibility of evil is inherent in the very nature of existence. To exist, in order for something to exist, it does... I'm talking within creation, not of God. But within creation, everything... Well, it's... I'm sorry, let me back up slightly. In all things that are contingent, like us, everything in our world, everything in time, etc., is contingent. Didn't have to exist, and therefore it all comes inherently with the possibility of not existing. So all things that are contingent, it's not that you need the possibility of evil so much as the possibility of evil is just completely inherent within them. It's inescapable. There's no way to have a contingent thing and have it not be possible that it could not exist. It's kind of in the definition of contingent. But so you don't need to talk about evil in order to talk about good. You don't, in particular, you don't even need a concept of evil. You don't need evil to exist in any way, shape, or form in order to have good, because of course evil can't even exist. And you can have a perfect world in which you appreciate all the things which actually do exist. You don't need a contrast to any actual by actual evil I mean the real non-existence of something. It's the word actual is kind of antithetical to non-existent in a scholastic sense, at least, so it gets a little confusing there. But the point is, you don't need something that could have existed to not exist, or that should exist to not exist, in order to be able to appreciate that which in fact does exist. I think people get overly bound up by rules without understanding what the rules are about, can fall prey to that. But, think about beauty. You don't need to bathe yourself in ugliness in order to appreciate beauty. You appreciate beauty, for itself. It can sometimes help to see different beauty, because especially in our fallen state, we can, we can become used to beauty. And so, if you go and see the sunrise every morning, you might eventually get tired of it, through a weakness of your own, incidentally. That being said, at the same time, you can't see a sunrise all throughout the day, so the intervening not sunrise, where you're looking at other things, may well help you. You don't need to go and look at ugliness, you don't need to look at disease. But here's the asymmetry. You cannot talk about evil, you cannot conceive of evil without good. Since evil is a privation of good, it has to be inherently in reference to good. Good can be in reference to other goods, but, like in the sense that like a painting is of a thing. If you paint a person, that good thing, the beauty of the painting, is in reference to the beauty of the person. If you paint a sunset or paint a mountain or, whatever you are painting that is beautiful, it is in reference to some other beauty. It doesn't have to be in reference to ugliness, but ugliness does need to be in reference to beauty. Now, you can have things for which, beauty doesn't specially apply or anything like that. That's not ugliness, that's simply, something for which beauty is not relevant. But actual ugliness requires a concept of beauty because ugliness is a deformity of beauty. If there isn't a right place for your nose to be, your nose, sticking out the side of your head can't be in the wrong place. Only if there is a correct place for your nose to be can your nose now be in the wrong place. And so on. Only if there is truth can you tell a lie. So it's kind of a fascinating thing that all evil is in reference to good. It doesn't have any sort of independent existence, so it has to be. In this sense, evil... This is why there's the metaphorical sense that evil is always parasitic on good. That evil can't exist in its own. And for this reason, because of this asymmetry, it's why things like universes in which there is a hell but no heaven make no sense. Now, I do understand that artistically speaking, a universe where there's a hell but no heaven, it does speak to a certain emotional reality that, you can look on, especially if you watch the news, say. I try not to for this very reason. I try to get the news essentially in summary afterwards. More for other reasons than because of this. But, nonetheless, say, especially if you do something like watch television news, heaven help you, you're looking on a tremendous amount of the worst that people have to offer. And so there's an emotional reality that goes along with sort of looking at this so much that you can start to feel like you can start to feel like this is everything. It's not, and if you thought about it, it's not. But at the same time, there is an emotional reality that I'm told Hellraiser has this. There's a hell but no heaven. You can be damned but you can't be saved. The only two options are winking out of existence or eternal torture, roughly. But it doesn't make any sense because the eternal has to come from somewhere. It doesn't work to... It doesn't work to just sort of have this eternal degradation. It's the same reason, incidentally, why the art that was used to depict hell commonly, the fiery, like being boiled forever in the cauldron with the stench of brimstone, and devils poking you with pitchforks. Well, it doesn't. I mean, they can't actually literally be true because the problem is if fire burns you away, additional fire can't do anything to you because you're not there anymore. And if it doesn't hurt because there's no destruction of you. So an infinitely long destruction of you, where there's still infinitely more time in which you're going to be destroyed, means that you're never actually destroyed. And so it can't hurt. It can't really cause suffering. Again, brimstone smells for a while, and your nose gets used to it. I mean, the worst case, something would destroy your nose or whatever, and then you can't smell it anymore. There's only so much, if the pointy things injure you, well, then there's less of you to get injured by the pointy thing, because you can't cut a man in his cut. His flesh isn't, closed in order to slash him there. So if you cut off a man's arm, you can't cut it off a second time, because when you wave your sword where his arm no longer is, none of him comes off. And so on. You can't be poked forever with pointy things, suffering the whole time as if you were whole and poked with a pointy thing and now injured, for the simple reason that either it injures you or it doesn't. If you're injured, repetitive poking doesn't really do very much. And if you're not injured, the poking wouldn't really have hurt in the first place. That is to say, this sort of evil, it works as a metaphor. It speaks to certain emotional things. but it doesn't, actually work. It's not philosophically coherent, and it's not a reflection of actual Christian theology. The imagery of hell, it was, something meant to educate people and to stand in a visual way for a much more complicated concept. It's very hard to represent things like the frustration of trying to find good in the eternal frustration of turning away from the actual source of goodness. That's very difficult to represent in art. Being boiled alive while, a bat-winged ugly thing is poking you with a pitchfork. Much, much easier to represent in art. Less philosophically coherent, but, actually viable to do. And in particular, viable to do to people who don't already have the concept. That's the whole point of teaching, is to give things to people who don't already know it. And so, people, make compromises, because, if you need to teach somebody, then you have to communicate it to them. And all, as the saying goes, all things are appropriated according to the mode of the one who's learning. What you know dictates what you can learn. Which is why learning is a progressive process. You learn a bit, and that allows you to learn more, and that allows you to learn more. You can't learn everything all at once, because the knowledge itself has to build. It's just the nature, the progressive nature of learning, etc. So, okay, so this was much, much longer than I expected. Hopefully it was at least interesting. But the basic point here is there is this very strong asymmetry between good and evil, that you can think about good without thinking about evil, but you can't think about evil without thinking about good. So it has a lot of practical applications, especially to anybody writing stories. The very fact, I think, is frankly a crutch in a lot of cases, where people who don't have the strength to write about good will only write about evil because it'll remind you of the good, roughly. Better to have the strength to actually write about the good stuff straight up, I think. But anyhow, I don't want to get into another digression. So, there it is. I hope this was of some interest to you. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.